The first warning came as a whisper through the command net, but was quickly drowned by the screams of dying soldiers and the shriek of broken metal flying across the field. The alien fleet had not just returned, it had evolved. They came without mercy, riding thunder and flame, their ships black and glowing with energy that made scanners go blind. The human outposts on the outer rim were erased in hours, leaving only static where voices used to be. One by one, the colonies fell silent, and even the bravest captains turned back to Earth with fear in their hearts. They called it the Shattering, a war not of territory, but of survival. No one knew why the alien queen had unleashed her fury, but those who faced her armies whispered of a presence behind it all, a presence wounded, hidden, and sacred. On the fourth moon of Tarsi's 9, the last field unit had barely set up triage when the front collapsed. Wounded humans lay shoulder to shoulder, some barely breathing, their cries drowned by the chaos outside. The sky was dark with smoke, and the ground trembled with every nearby explosion. A young combat medic named Elias was stitching a soldier's side when a deafening silence fell over the valley. The air changed. The wind died, and even the insects froze in place. Something ancient and powerful was watching. From the far ridge, a shape appeared carried on a makeshift hoverbed by towering alien warriors clad in obsidian armor. They marched with reverence, not rage. Their heads bowed around the bed like priests in a funeral. But the figure lying there was no corpse. It was the wounded daughter of the alien queen. Bloodied and gasping, her armor cracked, her skin glowing blue and smeared with battle wounds. She was feared more than her mother by many soldiers, called the Thunder Fang by those who had survived her wrath. Yet now, she looked small, fragile, and barely alive. The alien warriors scanned the human camp, their weapons pulsing with heat. They spoke no words, only laid the body down and waited. None of the human medics moved forward, not because they were cowards, but because the fear was thick in the air. Like poison, one wrong move could mean death for everyone. A single needle prick on the wrong vein might be mistaken for assassination. Elias stared at the alien girl, her chest rising slowly, her breath whistling with pain. He had nothing to lose, not since his brother died at the border, not since the letter that set his family home was gone. He stood up and walked forward, each step scraping the silence like a blade across stone. All eyes turned to him, human and alien alike, and yet no one stopped him. The warriors let him pass, watching with eyes that glowed like fire trapped in crystal. Elias knelt beside her, checked her pulse, and muttered softly, more to himself than to anyone else, "She's bleeding internally. Lungs collapsing. I need plasma now." His hands moved fast, cleaning wounds, adjusting pressure, inserting alien-compatible nanobots from a captured medkit. Every second felt like a gamble with his life. But he didn't pause. The alien girl flinched once, then her hand shot up, gripping his forearm with sudden force. Her claws pierced his skin. But he didn't pull away. Instead, he met her glowing eyes and whispered, "I'm not your enemy." She stared at him, blinking slowly, then released her grip. The alien warriors raised their weapons slightly but didn't fire. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward and placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. No words were exchanged, but a nod passed between them like a silent contract. Elias continued the treatment, patching her lung and using old soldiers' tricks he had learned in underground war zones. When it was done, she was stable, but barely. The silence around them broke as a single alien voice echoed across the camp, low and filled with both sorrow and awe. "You've touched the Queen's blood and lived." No one else dared move near her, not the trained surgeons, not the ranking officers, not the diplomats watching from orbit. Only Elias remained, sitting beside the warrior princess with his arm still bleeding and his hands shaking. In that moment, he wasn't just a medic. He was the only human in the galaxy who had risked touching the untouchable. And from that point forward, Nothing would ever be the same. Elias did not sleep that night, but sat beside the alien princess, with blood drying on his arm and sand crunching beneath his boots. He listened to her slow breathing, watched her chest rise and fall under makeshift medical wrappings, and kept one hand near the injector just in case her vitals dropped again. The rest of the camp kept their distance, pretending to be busy with data logs or tending to lesser wounds, but their eyes always found their way back to her. Fear wrapped the valley tighter than the cold wind ever could. Because she wasn't just any soldier, she was the Queen's only heir. The fury of 1,000 systems, and the nightmare of 12 war fronts. Now she was lying helpless among humans who had once cheered for her death. The alien warriors had formed a circle around the tent, but allowed Elias to pass freely now. He had no idea why they trusted him after what he'd done, cutting open their princess and fixing her with human tech. Maybe it was because he didn't hesitate. Or maybe because she didn't kill him when she had the chance. Or maybe they had orders to wait, to watch, to judge. Whatever the reason, Elias felt like he was being tested and watched from every angle. It was a kind of pressure that made your spine itch and your lungs tighten. By morning, the camp had shifted from silence to whispers. Some said Elias had performed black magic to survive her touch. Others claimed the Queen herself would arrive to destroy them all for witnessing her daughter's weakness. Command sent a coded message, telling Elias to prepare for emergency extraction, but he deleted it without reading the rest. He wasn't going to leave her behind. Not when her breathing had finally steadied. Not when her hand had briefly clutched his again. During the night, she woke slowly, her glowing eyes flickering beneath heavy lids, like a flame rising through oil. Elias froze as she shifted, unsure whether she would strike or speak. Her first breath came with a cough, and blood spotted her lips, but she didn't scream. Instead, she looked at Elias and whispered something in a language he didn't understand. It wasn't a threat, it sounded like a question. He leaned closer and said, "I'm still here." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. Her voice was weak, but her presence filled the tent like a storm behind glass. Even wounded, she had the gravity of a sun. Elias offered her a nutrient tube, and to his surprise, she took it without protest. Her fingers brushed his hand again, softer this time, deliberate. It was the smallest gesture, but it was everything. The alien guards outside noticed too. One of them entered, bowed slightly, and laid a gleaming device at Elias's feet. It pulsed with energy, unfamiliar yet calming. The warrior said, "She has marked you. You are her healer now." Elias didn't know what that meant, but he understood one thing. There was no turning back. Later that day, a ship appeared in the sky, sleek, dark and silent. No thrusters, no noise, just presence. It hovered above the valley, casting a shadow across the camp. Everyone paused, even the injured soldiers, as a single message was broadcast across all channels. "Prepare the daughter of the crown. The Queen approaches." The words chilled even the bravest commanders. Panic rippled through the camp. Evac orders were whispered, plans were drawn, and units began to retreat deeper into the mountains. But Elias remained in the tent, adjusting vitals, checking readings, watching her color return. She did not seem afraid of the message. Instead, her eyes closed again like she was preparing herself. Elias leaned closer and said, "Is your mother going to kill me for touching you?" Her lips moved faintly, and he caught just 2 words. "Not yet." That night, the stars vanished behind clouds that weren't clouds at all. Alien royal banners flickered in the sky, glowing like fire shaped by law. The Queen was near, and everyone knew it. But Elias never left the princess's side, even when they told him to hide. He had stitched her wounds, stopped her bleeding, risked his life not out of duty, but because no one else would. Now whatever came next, he would face it alone, unless she chose to stand with him. And as the shadows deepened around the valley, her fingers gently curled around his wrist again. Elias barely moved when the Queen's ship descended like a storm cloud made of polished stone and light. Its silence was louder than thunder and heavier than any weapon humans had faced in this war. The ship did not land but hovered inches above the ground as a ramp extended from its core. The alien guards stood straighter, their heads bowed as golden dust scattered from the air around the vessel. No one had to announce her arrival because the atmosphere itself reacted to her presence. The Queen had come. She stepped down in layers of armor shaped like molten silver and obsidian blades. Her crown shimmered like it was alive, and her long hair moved as if it were underwater. Her eyes burned the color of dying stars, and her skin was as flawless as a sculpted gem. Each step she took left behind faint glowing marks that vanished seconds later. The human commanders watching through binoculars did not speak, did not breathe, did not blink. They knew they were watching something older than their civilization. The Queen stopped just outside the medical tent where her daughter lay. Two of her personal guards moved to follow, but she raised one finger, and they froze. Elias stood inside, unsure whether to bow, salute, or simply accept his fate. She entered without a sound, her eyes scanning the room with divine coldness. Her gaze landed on her daughter, then moved to the human kneeling beside her. "I was told you saved her," she said. Elias nodded and tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He swallowed and tried again, this time louder. "I did what I could. She was dying. I couldn't let her die." The Queen stepped closer, examining her daughter's face with a flicker of something soft, regret or sorrow or fear. She brushed a lock of hair from the girl's brow and whispered something in her native tongue. Then she turned to Elias. "You touched royal blood," she said calmly. "You entered her body with metal and fire and foreign tools. In my empire, that demands execution unless done by decree." Elias kept his ground and didn't flinch. "I didn't ask for permission," he said. "I just tried to save a life." The Queen studied him for several seconds before speaking again. "She lives," the Queen said, "and her spirit did not reject you. That changes everything." Her words caused the guards outside to shift in place, exchanging uncertain glances. The rules of their people were strict and old, but none could argue with survival. The princess stirred in her sleep, her breathing smoother now, her wounds sealed by both alien healing gels and Elias's steady hands. "She lives because you broke tradition," the Queen whispered. Outside the tent, diplomats from Earth had arrived by now, pleading for peace or mercy or explanation. They had no idea what was happening inside, and they feared the worst. The alien Queen ignored them all, stepping back from her daughter's side and facing Elias fully. "You carry no title," she said. "No bloodline, no command chain. Why did you do it?" Elias stared at the ground, unsure of what truth she wanted to hear. Then he looked up and answered her honestly. "Because she reminded me of someone I couldn't save," he said. "My brother. He died in my arms. I couldn't do anything back then. But this time I could." The Queen's face did not change, but something in the air softened. Her next words were not a command but a recognition. "You have earned a name in my court," she said. "He who defied death." Elias didn't know if that was an honor or a sentence. Before leaving, she placed a crystal vial beside her daughter's bed. "This will speed her recovery. She will wake in 2 sunrises." Elias nodded, but the weight of everything that had just happened crushed his chest like armor too tight. The Queen turned and left the tent, her presence vanishing as quickly as it had come. The guards followed, without a word, and the ramp of the ship pulled shut like the lid of a coffin. Then the sky cleared again, as if nothing had happened. Inside the tent, Elias sat back against the wall, staring at the girl who now bore his touch and protection. He didn't feel like a hero, or a soldier, or a savior. He felt like someone who had crossed a line the universe would never erase. And now that line would follow him forever. The alien Queen's departure did not bring peace to the human camp. Instead, It created more tension, like a storm passing but leaving the sky heavier than before. Command tried to resume operations. But everyone knew things had changed. The soldiers avoided Elias now, not out of hatred, but out of fear. They looked at him like he had become something foreign, something marked by powers they didn't understand. He wasn't just a medic anymore. He was the one who touched the air. Elias tried to ignore the whispers and kept his focus on her recovery. He checked her vitals every hour, adjusted the drips, monitored healing patterns, and studied the glowing alien vial the Queen had left. It reacted to her skin like it recognized her, pulsing gently in rhythm with her heartbeat. She was stable now, her body visibly stronger. But she hadn't yet opened her eyes. Every breath she took made Elias wondered what would happen when she finally spoke. Would she thank him or condemn him? The alien guards remained stationed around the tent without saying a word. They never interfered, never assisted, never left. They simply watched, silent statues of war, ready to act if needed. Elias couldn't read their expressions, but he could feel their judgment in every glance. He started talking to the princess aloud while he worked, not expecting answers but needing to fill the silence. "I don't know why they listen to you," he'd say, "but I hope you wake up soon and explain it yourself." On the third morning, something shifted. The air around her shimmered slightly, and a hum rose from her chest like a vibration through the air. Elias sat up straight, eyes locked on the monitor, watching her vitals jump and stabilize. Then, without warning, her eyes opened golden and glowing, sharp as blades. She turned her head slowly toward him, her gaze alert, not confused. Her voice came next, low and clear. "You stayed." Elias didn't move at first, caught between relief and fear. Then he nodded, his mouth dry as he replied, "Yeah, I stayed." She sat up slowly, her muscles tensing but holding firm, her strength returning faster than expected. Her fingers brushed her side where the worst wound had been. Then her eyes moved back to him. "You healed me," she said, "with your hands, with your mind, with your courage." He simply replied, "I had to." There was a long pause between them. The alien guard stepped forward but halted when the princess raised her hand. "Do not touch him," she said. "He is mine to command now." Elias's heart skipped, unsure what that meant, unsure whether to feel honored or afraid. The guards bowed their heads in silence, stepping back without resistance. Whatever she had become, she was now speaking. With authority, she climbed out of the bed slowly, her limbs still weak but recovering fast. Elias reached to support her, but she waved him off and stood on her own. Her armor had been damaged beyond use, but she wrapped herself in the ceremonial cloth the guards had brought. Even injured, she looked regal, powerful, and terrifyingly calm. Then she looked at Elias again, this time with curiosity. "Why did you not flee after you touched me?" He didn't lie to her. "I had nowhere to go," he said, "and I couldn't leave someone behind who needed help." She nodded once, accepting the truth like a command. Then she stepped closer, her voice softer but no less sharp. "You risked death, but I offer you purpose. Serve me, human." Elias didn't respond immediately. Outside the tent, the world still waited for orders. The diplomats were desperate to re-establish control, while commanders worried about consequences. But inside, Elias stood facing the most powerful wounded being in the galaxy, and she was asking, not demanding, his loyalty. He didn't know what saying yes would cost him, but he knew what saying no might cause. She extended her hand, palm glowing with a thin thread of energy like a living oath. And after a long breath, Elias placed his hand in hers. Whatever line he had crossed before was nothing compared to this new one. The moment Elias took her hand, something ancient passed between them like a silent contract written in blood and light. A pulse of energy moved through his body, hot and cold at once, as if the universe paused to witness the bond. The alien guards knelt in unison. Not to Elias, but to her, the heir reborn. no longer just wounded, but awakened. The glowing line between their palms faded slowly, absorbed into their skin like ink drawn into stone. Elias let go first, feeling the weight of what he had just agreed to without fully understanding its reach. He was no longer a mere medic in a forgotten battlefield tent. She turned to her guards and gave her first command since rising. Summon the vessel. We returned to the throne sector. The guards moved swiftly, speaking into wrist implants and activating hidden protocols. Above them, the sky darkened as a massive royal cruiser emerged from orbit like a beast surfacing from deep water. It shimmered, with layered armor and runes, bearing the crest of the queen herself. Elias had never seen a ship that looked like it could swallow cities whole. She looked back at him, eyes calm but unreadable. "You have bound yourself to my survival," she sighed. "That makes you part of the court." Elias didn't know what court meant in her world, but he could feel the shift around him. No longer an outsider, no longer ignored. He was now marked by the royal blood. It wasn't a promotion. It was a burden disguised as a gift. But he didn't pull away. Within an hour, they were aboard the cruiser. The halls inside were unlike anything Elias had walked before. Organic metal, glowing veins along the walls, structures that shifted as they passed. It felt like the ship was alive, aware, and watching. Alien officers nodded respectfully as the princess walked, though many paused at the sight of a human walking beside her without chains. No one dared question her decision out aloud. She had nearly died, and now she walked stronger than ever, with a human at her side. They reached her private chamber, a towering space filled with floating orbs, starlight mirrors, and a healing pool that sang like wind through glass. She stepped into the water, allowing it to surround her with warmth and light. Elias stood near the edge, waiting silently as she submerged herself fully, then rose again with glowing skin and stronger breath. Her wounds were nearly gone, but the scar on her side remained faintly visible. She traced it with one finger and looked at him. "This one, I'll keep." He didn't ask why, but she explained. "Anyway, it was made by war, healed by a stranger, kept by choice." Elias nodded slowly, unsure if it was a compliment or something deeper. She stepped out and walked toward him, wrapped in a gown formed from the healing mist. "You have not asked your reward," she said. "Do you want glory, safety, or freedom?" He shook his head and said, "I didn't do it for a reward." She tilted her head, curious again. "In my world, everything comes with a cost. Or a gain." Elias smiled faintly. "Maybe in mine, we just help who needs it." She turned from him and looked out through a transparent panel that showed the stars rushing past. "This war isn't over. My people will expect revenge. But I don't want revenge anymore." He stepped beside her and replied, "Then what do you want?" She looked up, her voice softer now. "I want to understand you. And I want you to understand us." Elias didn't answer right away, but the silence between them wasn't heavy this time. For once, it was a shared quiet, not fear or doubt. She reached out and rested her hand on his shoulder, firm but not forceful. "Then we start with truth." Later, as the cruiser entered deep royal territory, word had already spread across systems. The heir had survived. She was returning. And with her came a human unarmed, unknown, and untouched by protocol. Some called him a threat. Others called him a miracle. But none could deny he had changed something in the heart of the Empire. Not with weapons. Not with lies. But with bare hands and a decision no soldier dared make. And now, the galaxy was watching. The royal cruiser slowed as it entered the gravity field of the imperial capital. A world shaped by floating palaces and towers that touched the stars. Dozens of escort ships formed a ring around them, each glowing with power and tradition, ready to announce the heir's return. But this time, something different stood at the center of the formation. A human was visible walking beside her as equals entered the court of gods. From orbit, cameras caught the moment and spread it to every system within the Queen's rule. The galaxy gasped at the sight of her living and him alive. Elias didn't wear armor or royal garments, just the same field medic uniform stained with weeks of dust and blood. He didn't speak much during the descent, watching her, waiting for the next twist in this strange journey. She, however, stood tall, calm, and regal as if her body no longer remembered pain. The scar on her side was faint but visible, a reminder of both war and survival. She looked at Elias as the royal gates opened below them. From this point on, everything will try to tear us apart. They stepped onto the landing platform together. Thousands of soldiers bowed in silence, lining both sides in perfect formation. Priests of the old stars chanted words from a forgotten age as a golden bridge of light formed beneath their feet. At the far end stood the Queen, her face carved from stone, her eyes unreadable. Behind her waited the circle of judgment, the advisors who decided fate when laws had no answer. The air was thin and heavy, like breathing inside a memory. Elias kept his pace beside the princess, refusing to walk behind her even when tradition demanded it. The Queen did not speak until they were just 10 steps apart. When she finally did, her voice echoed through the entire court without force or amplification. "You have returned, my daughter, and you bring with you the forbiddens." Elias felt the pressure in his chest rise, knowing this was where everything could fall apart. But the princess answered with fire in her voice. "He is not forbidden. He is chosen. By me." The circle stirred, whispers flooding the grand chamber like a rising tide. Some shouted that no human should stand where kings once fell. Others pointed at Elias's presence as proof that tradition had already broken. But the Queen raised one hand, silencing all sound instantly. "Let him speak," she said. Elias swallowed hard, then stepped forward. "I didn't come here to rule," he said. "I didn't even come to survive. I just didn't want her to die." His voice was steady but quiet, and that quiet cut deeper than any roar. "I know your laws. I know I shouldn't be here, but I'm not your enemy. I'm her medic. I'm her choice." The circle debated, their voices layered in ancient language and futuristic code. But the Queen said nothing more, simply watching them both. The final vote came without ceremony, one by one. The circle placed their hands on a shared crystal. It glowed white, then red, then finally settled on silver. A voice from the crystal spoke. "Let the human stay. Let the bond stand." The chamber remained silent, uncertain whether this was victory or warning. But the princess walked forward and stood beside Elias without hesitation. Later that night, as stars shifted around the capital world, Elias sat alone on a balcony overlooking alien waterfalls that flowed upward. His fingers brushed the small crystal insignia they had pinned to his chest, a sign of protection, recognition, and danger. He didn't belong in this place of power, but fate had placed him in its heart. She appeared beside him, still dressed in ceremonial cloth, her hair braided in gold and bone. She didn't say anything at first, just sat beside him and looked at the stars. Then she whispered, "You have changed more than just me." Elias turned to her and asked, "Are you sure this is what you want? Me here, with you? Like this?" She looked at him and smiled for the first time since the battlefield. "I was born into war, but for the first time, I feel like I'm alive." He smiled back, unsure what tomorrow held but certain of one thing. He had crossed every line, broken every rule, and yet somehow earned her trust. And now, together, they would face whatever the stars sent next. In the following days, Elias was moved to a chamber close to the royal quarters, a place once meant for foreign kings and honored guests. The walls were decorated with glowing symbols, each one pulsing softly when he passed by. Servants brought him food he couldn't name, water that tasted like honey and snow, and garments woven from silk grown in gravity wells. But Elias didn't feel like a guest, nor a prisoner. He felt like something in between. He was watched constantly, measured, in silence by nobles who thought his presence was a threat to everything they knew. Still, he stayed calm, knowing he had already crossed the line no one else dared. The princess visited often, but never as a ruler and never with guards. She came as herself, curious, quiet, and sometimes lost in her own thoughts. They spoke of her childhood under pressure, of drills disguised as games, of punishments given in the name of strength. She told him about the crown she never wanted, the blade she was forced to carry, and the battles where she had no choice but to kill. Elias listened, never judging, just understanding her through the silence between her words. One night, she asked, "Do you ever regret saving me?" He answered, with a smile and a simple never. Outside their private talks, the empire struggled to adapt. The other heirs, hidden deep in the political shadows, began making moves to discredit her. Some called her bond with Elias a weakness, others called it treason against blood. Old families whispered of coups, and merchant guilds threatened rebellion if a human stood near the throne. The court was full of smiles but smelled of fear. One evening, during a high gathering of the royal houses, the princess walked in without armor or crown. Elias followed, wearing a robe he hated, its weight like a net on his shoulders. The hall was filled with music and fake laughter, but every eye turned when they entered. She raised one hand, silencing the orchestra, and then spoke clearly to the nobles. "Say what you must. Say it now, while I stand here unarmed." The room froze like stone. A counselor from the house of Talvek stepped forward, his voice sharp and shaking. "You bring a human to the seat of judgment. He is not one of us. He is not royal. He is not sacred." She didn't flinch but answered calmly, "He saved what none of you could. He stood when you ran. That is sacred enough for me." Others joined the argument, their words a flood of fear wrapped in custom. But she stood still, unmoved. Elias stepped forward only once, lifting his voice not in defense but in truth. "I didn't ask to be here," he said. "But I won't pretend I didn't try everything to keep her alive, even if I had died in the process." The crowd grew silent again, the power of his honesty cutting deeper than any political blade. The queen watched all of it from above, saying nothing, her expression unreadable. After the arguments ended, she stood and descended the steps slowly. Her footsteps were like thunder masked in velvet. She stood between Elias and her daughter, facing them both with fire in her eyes. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked. "The people will never see him as more than a shadow under your feet." The princess looked directly at her mother, her jaw steady. "Then let them keep their eyes on the ground while I rise." The queen paused, then did something no one expected. She laughed once, bitter and low. "Then rise, child, and let him rise with you." The next day, Elias was summoned to a chamber that hadn't been opened in 100 years. Inside stood 12 ancient warriors preserved in crystal, once guardians of the throne. The queen touched the wall, awakening them, and spoke just one command: "Bind him to the vow of flame." The warriors moved, each placing a hand on Elias's chest, branding him with light. He gasped but didn't pull away. The pain faded, replaced by something else, something older than words. When it ended, the queen whispered, "Now you are of the blood." The mark on Elias's chest shimmered faintly as he stepped out of the chamber, his heartbeat steady but heavy. The ancient vow of flame was more than a ritual. It was a transformation sealed by blood, history, and cosmic law. The alien guards who once stared with cold suspicion now stepped aside with quiet respect. Elias didn't feel like a prince or a knight or a soldier, but something between them all. He had been pulled from a battlefield and placed into a throne world he barely understood. And now, he carried a symbol that no human before him had survived. The princess waited for him in the Hall of Suns, dressed in silver robes that flowed like light itself. Her eyes softened when she saw him, and she moved toward him not as royalty, but as something more human. Their hands met briefly in the space between them. and no words were needed. The vow had already spoken for them, louder than politics, louder than blood. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Now they can never push you away." Elias simply replied, "I didn't want power. I wanted to stay by your side." The queen announced their joining in a voice that echoed across every colony, every world in the empire. She called it an alliance of survival, of honor, of unity born not of war, but of a single moment of mercy. Many cheered. Some screamed. A few planets closed their gates in protest, but none could deny the effect. The balance had shifted, and with it, the future of two species. The Empire's bloodline now included a human, whose only weapon had been courage and healing, and it could not be undone. Elias was given a new name in the ancient tongue, one even the translators could not simplify. It meant, the one who dared without asking. He never wore armor. He never carried a weapon. But everywhere he went, silence followed him, not because of fear, but because of what he represented. A man who had crossed a line the universe said should never be crossed, and made it sacred. Time moved quickly in. The following weeks, treaties were drafted. Ambassadors from Earth arrived, confused and cautious. Some demanded Elias be returned. Others called him a traitor to his kind, but the princess stood beside him in every council, and her voice outweighed. "There's all," she said. "He is not yours to take. He is ours to protect." And the queen did not object. The tension remained, but war did not return. For the first time in decades, the front lines went quiet. Enemy fleets drifted in space without orders, waiting to see what would happen next. Elias visited medical camps in alien territories, offering help where blasters had once spoken. He sat with orphans from both sides, stitching wounds and telling them stories about stars and peace. They called him the fire healer. At night, when the royal halls quieted, he would sit with her under the domed skies of her private chamber. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. But in the stillness, something unbreakable grew, a bond not just of fate or duty, but of trust. She told him she had once dreamed of dying in battle, because no one ever showed her another way. He told her that saving people didn't always fix everything, but it was still worth doing, and they both agreed they had changed each other forever. On the first anniversary of their vow, a great celebration was held across the stars. The queen stood before the empire and declared her daughter the rightful ruler of the future. Then she turned to Elias and said only one thing: "You were never meant to be small." He bowed, but not from weakness, from respect. Beside him, the princess placed her hand on his chest, over the mark that still pulsed like fire, and whispered, "You were the only one who saw me bleeding and walked toward me." As fireworks lit the twin moons above them, Elias looked out over a world that once wanted him gone. Now it called him one of its own.